Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Dark Galaxy, the Zuijo Special. Now this is a deck that's been pretty much a fan favourite for ages, as has the character of Zuijo, and its Duel Links implementation is also pretty exciting. It's actually quite fun to play and it's very strong. So what a better place to start than the skill Void Destruction. So, can be activated from turn 2 onwards if all of the monsters in your constructed deck are Dark Attribute Galaxy type monsters. So, once again, one of these very restrictive skills, but this does lock us into a type and attribute, so I guess we can't use any of the Light Galaxy stuff. Choose one attack position normal monster on your field. This turn, that monster inflicts piercing damage, so the best target for that is going to be our Pale Rider, which is only a 1600 piercer, which is not the best thing in the world. Obviously, we'd rather have that piercing on something a lot bigger, but it's still pretty good. Then we can send the top 3 cards of our deck to the graveyard. If a monster or monsters with 1600 or more attack were sent to the graveyard by this effect, you can add one of those monsters to your hand. Now, this is very important because the only normal summonable level 4 is going to be the Pale Rider itself. So, if we want to get just an extra body that we can slap in defense mode or a normal summon that we can slap down and then use as tribute fodder, we have to make sure we hit Pale Rider itself, which is a little bit annoying. Other than that, we can get back any of the boss monsters in the deck, notably Star Trancer, which is kind of the key combo piece of the deck, or Elysium, which is kind of an extra boss but can be quite useful, but primarily we're going to want to be getting our Void Velge Requiem back to our hand. So this skill basically, as long as we can find a normal monster, allows us to most of the time +1 every single turn, which is really, really good. If you think back to, for example, the old Noodle skill, being able to just get an extra body is really, really valuable, especially when that body can be a boss or a normal summon, or Star Trancer, which is kind of like a normal summon if you squint at it, but we'll get into that in a minute. So we'll start off with our first boss, Void Velge Requiem. So 2500 attack is really, really good. 2000 defenses, I mean, it's okay. It's not fantastic, but it's decent. We can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. This card gains attack equal to the number of face-up Dark Attribute monsters on your field times 300 until the end of this turn. So if this is the only monster we've got, it'll go up to 28. If we have a full field of monsters, this will go up to 34. Then, if your opponent has a face-up Light Attribute monster on the field, he gains an extra 600 attack. So once again, if it's just him on his own, he'll go up to 34. If we have a full board of monsters, he'll go up to 4,000, which is actually really, really good. 4,000 is a very, very good number to hit. Most of the time, 4,000 will be enough to at least crash with anything. The only few exceptions are going to be like Wyrm Excavator, that sort of monster, which can get a lot bigger. A key thing to note is that a lot of the best decks in the game right now do have light monsters. We're thinking Metarion, Cyber Dragon, Light Galaxy, all of these are light focused decks, which means we will always be getting the extra 600 bonus, which is quite nice. Then we have Void Velge Elysium, and Elysium is... it's good. It's not like a bad card. It's a little bit underwhelming, but when it is relevant, it becomes very relevant. So we can send one card from our hand to the graveyard. This is the part of the skill that we don't really like, but this deck does plus quite a lot, so having a discard available isn't always the end of the world. We can change one face-up monster on the opponent's field to face-down defense position. This card gains 500 attack until the end of this turn. If we sent a monster to the graveyard to meet the requirement, this card cannot be destroyed by your opponent's trap cards this turn. Now that's only really relevant for Widespread Ruin, but it still is relevant nonetheless. Now why is Elysium pretty good? Because we can actually give Elysium piercing using Star Trancer. So this guy would come out as a 29. We can get up to 34 and give it piercing and flip something face down. So if your opponent has a low defense monster on the field, that could be a substantial hit to their life points. We're talking 3,000 plus. Plus, if we just have a normal monster on our field like Pale Rider, we could just flip something down that has low defense, attack over at Pale Rider, and still get in for a decent chunk. So Elysium, at first glance, isn't anything too impressive, but sometimes this will come up and sometimes this will win you games. Next up we have Void Velge Cataphract, and this card is also really good. 1000 attack, 1000 defense, fantastic stats, really good at playing around Meteor Charge, which is still very prominent in the meta. If we have another face-up Dark Attribute monster on your field during the turn that we normal summon this card, we can send the top card of our deck to the graveyard. If we sent a monster to the graveyard by this effect, we can add a level 8 Galaxy type monster from your graveyard to your hand. So this is pretty good, and this is why we're playing so few spell traps, because we want to make sure that Cataphract's effect is live pretty much all the time. All we have to do is just mill one card, and then we get a free plus. We get one of our level 8 bodies, which we have 5 of, back to our hand, and it doesn't have to be the card that's milled, it just has to be in our graveyard. So keeping a level 8 in the graveyard is generally quite a good idea to make sure that Cataphract always has a target to bring back. But this is just one of the many ways this deck can plus or pseudo plus, which does allow the deck to really play the game it wants to, be able to summon out a bunch of bosses in one turn, and be able to really apply a lot of pressure. Next up, Star Chancer, and this really is the heart and soul of the deck. You really want to be farming 3 of these from Zuijo. This is extremely important. So the stats on this guy don't really matter. Most of the time we're going to be immediately sending it to the graveyard with its effect. The only thing that's super relevant is 1700 attack means we can get it back with the skill, and 1200 defense can be okay if you're worried about dying to piercing, and you could, for example, not leave a monster that has really low defense, you can just tribute set over it with this. But we can send this face-up card from your field to the graveyard. We can special summon one Galaxy-type monster from your hand face up to your field. If we special summon a level 8 monster by this effect, this turn it gains 400 attack and inflicts piercing damage, which is really, really good, because that now means that we can get Wyrm Requiem all the way up to 4400 attack and give it piercing, which is really, really strong. This is kind of how this deck beats set 3, is primarily going to be the Star Chancer into Void-Veiled Requiem, and then ideally have like a piercing Pale Rider because of our skill as well. We then get a 44 and a 16 piercer, which we can then use to run over our opponent's monsters. And because of the way this deck works, where we're doing a lot of milling because of the skill and some of our other card effects, and then we can put a lot of cards back into our deck using various other different card effects, we want to just basically be putting this card into the graveyard and back into our deck, and back into our graveyard and back into our deck as much as we possibly can, so we're infinitely reusing Star Chancer throughout the course of the game. Then we have Void-Velg Globule, and this is one of those cards that can shuffle cards back into our deck. So shuffle 3 Dark Attribute Galaxy-type monsters from your graveyard into the deck. This turn, this face-up card can be treated as 2 tributes for the tribute summon of a Dark Attribute Galaxy-type monster in attack position. So this is absolutely fantastic. The only negative of this card is it has 0 attack. So if it does get changed into attack position with a Vritra Star or by Meteor Charge, we can take a lot of damage. But 1300 defense is respectable, and we can use this to easily get out our Requiem or Elysium. The only downside with Globule is sometimes we'll be there like we want to use Star Chancer, and we will only have like one boss to go into, so we won't need to use Globule. So in some of those situations, I will just summon Globule, use its effect, and then just tribute it for Star Chancer anyway, just to use Globule to refill the deck. Even though it kind of feels a little bit wasteful, sometimes that is just the correct decision. So Globule is still really, really good. As well as the fact that Globule is a sort of +1 because it discounts getting one of your bosses out. So usually a boss would require 2 tributes. This basically cuts it down by 1, which is like sort of a +1. It's just another one of those cards that has really insane value, along with our skill, along with Cataphract, and along with the next card we're going to talk about, Parafungus Colony. So once again, really good stats on this card. 1000, 1000 means we play around both effects of Meteor Charge. That if you have a face-up level 7 or higher Galaxy-type monster on your field, special summon a Parafungus Colony from your graveyard face up to your field. Now this doesn't come up too often, but when it does, it can be really important. So basically we want to just keep one colony in the graveyard at all times, and if we do get out one of our bosses, but we have the ability to summon out another, we can then summon out the colony, use its effect, bring back another colony, tribute both, and get out one of our other bosses again. Now this card can sometimes feel a little bit dead, because a lot of the time we're going to want to, for example, get out our bosses cheaper with Globule or get them out using Star Chancer. So Parafungus Colony sometimes feels like it's an extra card we don't really need. So theoretically, you could exchange this for another vanilla to get the skill active more often. I personally like this card because it has the 1000 attack, 1000 defense. There will be some situations where you'll just have to go full defensive because you just don't have an aggressive play to make. And all of the vanillas have extraordinarily low defense values, which means you're basically inviting extra damage from piercing, which is something we don't really want to do. That's why I personally have been preferring the colony. Then we have Pale Rider, 1600 attack, 0 defense. 0 defense really sucks, but again, this is very, very important for our skill because this is going to be the biggest piercer, and we just want normal monsters so that we can actually trigger the skill in general. And then Sentinel is just another normal monster. We just have this in here primarily, again, to trigger our skill. So for our legend spell, we are playing Pot of Avarice, and I'm not sure if this is going to end up being the best legend spell for this deck, but this is what we have been testing with. So shuffle 5 monsters from your graveyard back into the deck, Again, this deck is going to be milling a ton. If everything goes how we want it to, we're going to be milling at least 3 cards each turn, possibly more. So Pot of Avarice can just force those cards back into our deck, and getting a few extra draws can be really, really good. This deck can spend a lot of resources. Now, it can also generate a lot, but it can also spend a lot as well. So being able to get an extra +1 off a Pot of Avarice is also really, really good. If not Avarice, I would probably be playing Tribute to the Doomed, because that is just a really good way to just get damage through. So if not Avarice, I would say Doomed, but I think both are pretty good. Then we have 3 Universal Storm. We want back row hate. One of the biggest problems with this deck is trap cards. I mean, a lot of decks will say that, but this is a very, very aggressive deck that can get down a lot of damage very, very quickly, even through defensive monsters. But trap cards really do stop that from happening. So really, we want to end the game quickly in a similar way to how Light Galaxy really want to. Except this deck doesn't stall out in the same way as Light Galaxy, but we'll get into that when we talk about the actual game plan. But Universal Storm still really, really important for this deck. Then we have Talismanic Seal Array. Again, we want to be just getting as much damage in as possible and outing big threats, and this basically does both. On top of the fact that, again, this fills our deck back up with all the cards that we're milling, so it's sort of an invaluable tool. I think one of this is probably fine. We might even be able to cut this down to 0 after we do more testing, but so far, this has been pretty useful, and I do quite like it in its build. Then we have one of our new trap cards, Rice Terrace Crisis. Now, this card is a card I keep going back and forth on. I found against Metarion, this card was not actually super useful, but it is unbelievably useful against decks like Galaxy. Some decks are really, really hurt by this. Some decks just really don't care. And especially when you start playing against decks that aren't just the big 3, this card can start to fall off a little bit because there aren't that many decks that do special summon from the hand or graveyard consistently. Now, funnily enough, this is actually one of those decks because we have Star Chancer, which will special summon from the hand. So against this deck, Rice Terrace Crisis is pretty good. I would say overall, it is a decent card. It will usually have some use, but how effective it will be will vary depending on the matchup you're playing and how your opponent sequences their plays. And then we have Negate Attack. This could just as easily be widespread. I personally prefer Negate Attack because it's better against the entire field rather than specifically really good against something like Metarion. So Negate Attack, still absolutely fantastic. It's the safest option if you want to go for a bit more riskier but high risk, high reward. Widespread Ruin would be the pick. And then the extra deck really doesn't matter. We just chuck our Chronicles in here so that when we're playing on ladder, we can hopefully rank them up and get some Chronicle stuff. The extra deck literally does not matter in this deck. So how does the deck play? Well, we will basically be trying to just fill up the board with as many big guys as possible, give as many of them piercing as we can, and ram into our opponent's board, getting as much damage in as possible. Now this basically works against most decks, except maybe Psychic, which you kind of have to toss a coin. It's like, well, I either go full aggro and hope my opponent doesn't just summon out Candy live, weaken my entire board, clear it all and kill me, or you kind of play a bit more reserved and you try and play around just getting some piercing damage in with something like Star Chancer and Requiem. The only downside of playing this sort of strategy is Star Chancer only gives piercing for the turn, which means Requiem won't be able to just pierce every turn very easily. This is also a similar way that you can play against Metarion, which again is a bit awkward. Again, you don't want to really summon 3 monsters in attack mode against Metarion because they could just Assure a Star, Type Change Beam, OTK. So you have to kind of play around those matchups very, very specifically. But other than that, the deck is pretty unga bunga. We just spam out as many monsters as we can, give them all a big boost, slam into our opponent, and try and kill them. And this deck is actually quite good at doing this just because of all of the ways we have to plus, between Colony, between Globule, discounting our bosses, between Cataphract and just the plus this card gives us. We have Avarice, and our skill will usually be plussing us, usually every turn. So this deck does have a ton of ways to just keep gaining advantage and really good ways to spend that advantage to get massive damage in. But let's fire in some replays so I can show what I've been talking about.
なし